Everybody, welcome to the Atheist Experience. We are live at our new, evidently temporary time slot, but I'll get to that in just a minute. Today is Sunday, June 3rd, 2007, and for reasons beyond our control, we're on today from 1:30 to 3 p.m., and that's going to be changing, but I'm Matt Dillahunty, your host. Well, joining me this week, Ashley Perrien. Thanks to everybody who's tuned in. We're going to have the phone number up for you shortly. This is, in fact, a live call-in public access television program sponsored by the Atheist Community of Austin, a nonprofit educational organization promoting positive atheism and the separation of church and state. We have a normal set of announcements that I make every week, and last week I completely had to change them because we thought we were going to be shuffling all of our events to kind of accommodate the new time slot. As it turns out, I can kind of go back to a normal schedule of events because next week we'll be on the same channel, Channel 10, on the same day, Sunday, but we'll be moving again, and the new time slot will be from 3 p.m. to 4:30. So essentially we'll be going off the air when we used to come on the air. Okay. So for those of you who tune in, I'm sure you'll hear me say this 4 or 5 more times today. And the new time slot from 3 to 4:30 will hopefully be our new permanent home. It may actually turn out to be much, much better. It doesn't interfere with any of our regular events. It shifts dinner a little bit earlier. But it may actually open us up to a broader audience so that people who have to rush off to church at 6 o'clock will now be able to tune in for the whole show and call in and explain. And hopefully today, some of you who just left church and the inevitable brunch that comes after it have tuned in, and you'll be able to call in and explain what is your argument, what is your evidence to support the things that you believe. The purpose of our program is to kind of clear up misperceptions about atheists and atheism that have spread from pulpits and from just lay people who don't have a good understanding of what an atheist is, what atheists believe, what they don't believe, etc. We can answer questions, discuss various things. We'll Ashley be presenting kind of a topic that he's been looking into in the past few weeks, some responses to common or new even apologist arguments. For those of you who are interested in apologist arguments and the responses, I'm going to go ahead and take a second to recommend that you stop by ironchariots.org, which is a wiki that Russell Glasser and I have worked on along with a huge number of people from the community that listens to both of our programs. There's lots of good information there, and there are links to other good sites, talkorigins.org and other sites with answers to common apologist and creationist claims or whatever you happen to be discussing. We're here to kind of present views, have a good discussion, interact. We'll have the number up for you very shortly. You're free to call in and discuss anything. You don't have to stay on topic, although it's nice if you do. But there are a number of questions that come up that frequently, and so at our website, www.atheist-community.org, there's a frequently asked questions page. If you call in and have a question, we'll do our best to try and answer it, but we'd rather not answer the same question 4 or 5 times in a program. So I may eventually direct some people to the FAQ portion of the website. In addition to this program, the ACA also sponsors a bi-weekly internet audio program called The Nonprofits. It's available as a podcast and as a download. We were live yesterday, and we'll be live again the 16th, I think, June 16th. It's a Saturday. We're on from 2 to 3 p.m. or 2 to 3:30 p.m. Central, and in conjunction with that show, we run an internet chat service so that since we can't take phone calls during that program, the listeners can interact in the chat room, have good discussions. Who knows what they all talk about, but they do get a chance to feed good information to the hosts and participants on that program and offer new information and correct us. Yesterday, I made a mistake referring to Helsinki syndrome when I should have been talking about Stockholm syndrome, and it was kind of silly. But so yeah, correct my mistakes. I enjoy that. It's nice to find out that somebody's actually listening and that somebody's willing to correct you so that you don't make the same mistake and look like a dumbass later. But as far as the regular announcements go, the Atheist Community of Austin has weekly meetings every Sunday at Ventana del Sol on East Old Torf, beginning at 11:30. There was talk about shifting the time, but now that the TV show time is going to shift, I'm going to go ahead and assume that we're going to stick with our regular schedule. So next week's meeting should go off as normal. It may actually begin at 11. There was some talk about shifting the time. And after that meeting, there'll be a board meeting. So for all the ACA board members, We're just going to go ahead and have the board meeting at the regular time, since the show will be on at 3 o'clock next week, and we'll have more information on the board list available about that. We have a number of social events throughout the week. Starting this Wednesday, we're going to have a new schedule of weekly events. This Wednesday, we'll be having a game night at Thor's Hammer, North 183 at McNeil, starting at around, is it 7? 7 o'clock. We'll be doing that in conjunction with the Center for Inquiry Austin. They have their weekly game night there. We'll be joining them for that. The following Wednesday, we'll be going bowling. The Wednesday after that, we'll be playing some pool. There's more information available at the website. All of our events are open to any atheist or atheist-friendly person. You don't have to be a member to attend, but we are putting together these Wednesday night things to kind of promote kind of activities among members and guests and potential members. And one additional event, which right now we are limiting to members and guests of members, and please try an RSVP. We're going to be having movie night at Mike's house, and you can get more information on the members list, emailing any of the board members, or stopping by the website. On Thursdays, we have happy hour at Dog and Duck Pub starting at 7 o'clock. Dog and Duck's at 17th and Guadalupe. That's open. If you're coming down to any of those events to preach, proselytize, or provoke, don't. We'll give you the number in a minute. You can call in and talk to us. And normally after the program, we've been going to Threadgill's for dinner, but since we shifted the time, we're also going to shift the location. And today we're on the air till 3 o'clock, and we'll be going to Dog and Duck Pub since we love it there. You're welcome to come down and join us. We're just going to get some snacks, maybe a beer, sit around and talk, and not kind of worry about dinner so much. We're not sure what we're going to do next week, moving to the 3 to 4:30 time slot. We'll make some decisions and let you all know that week. But thanks to everybody who followed us over here to the new time slot, and hopefully we can convince you to follow us to the newer time slot next week. It's a little bit of a mess, but we'll get everything back stable. The audio portion of this program is available for download from the website, and the video is now going to be available on Google Video as well. We have, I think, 150 or 160 some odd episodes already posted on Google Video. We're talking about
2004 on.
Yeah, everything from 2004.
Everything from 2004 on is now available online.
And these are, for the most part, they're all like 90-minute programs, and so there's tons of stuff up there, and there's really good stuff from people who hosted the show before I came along. Ashley used to host the program, and then there was also Martin Wagner, Ray Blevins, and some others. So, and I don't know how much of that really old stuff's up there.
Probably not too much. I'm sure that there's maybe a couple episodes here and there, but I don't think it's all that much.
Yeah, we're looking to get our hands on some more of the stuff. I'm sure there are episodes that are lost forever, unfortunately. But I know some of the old members used to collect them. We're going to be talking to them, and I believe that American Atheists in their library has some of the very early episodes. Okay. And Joe Zemecki was actually, who's the Texas director for American Atheists now, is looking into getting that. Cover the board meeting, movie nights. Next Saturday is the Austin Pride Festival. I don't have the information with me. I apologize. I completely forgot to print that off before we got here. Saturday, June 9th, I know we'll have a booth set up down there. It'll be all day. I think it's at a park near Trinity is where it was last year, I think. There should be more information available at the website, and you can also do a Google search for the Austin Pride Festival and probably find out what's going on down there. Feel free to hit the website. For anybody who doesn't get through on the phone lines today, or doesn't want to get through on the phone lines today, or is watching on Google Video or something after the fact, you can email tv@atheist-community.org. That goes to myself, the co-host, the people behind the scenes that make the show happen, and you can ask any questions, provide feedback, criticism, comments, whatever you like. We can't guarantee that we'll respond to every email, but I do read them all and try my best to at least get some quick response off to people. And in some cases, we have really long conversations.
Yes.
We end up having kind of these discussions about apologetics, which ties into kind of what you're talking about.
Nice segue. All right, this actually was a member request from one of the viewer emails that we had, saying that he had seen the apologetics.com website, and they have a bi-weekly, give or take, audio podcast. It's about 2 hours long, and they covered different topics, obviously. A couple weeks ago, did the problem of evil, which I haven't listened to yet, but from what they were saying, the episode that was mentioned to us, I don't have the actual name of it offhand, I didn't write that down, but it was talking about along the lines of why atheists always get it wrong. What do atheists have to explain and why they're just not covering themselves correctly?
We just don't get it.
Yeah, apparently we're just out of the loop. And so they start off their audio podcast talking about how a couple weeks ago they did a show on the problem of evil and said that that was atheism's only silver bullet, because that was the only argument that atheists have, that if you accept the problem of evil, that means there is no God, versus there's lack of evidence for a God. If you believe evolution, for instance, then you could still say, well, there's a God, but he didn't actually create stuff.
There are theistic evolutionists.
So,
there are,
yeah,
Francis Collins accepts evolution, but also believes in a God.
Yeah. So evolution and a lot of other things don't disprove God.
Right.
They just provide naturalistic
They narrow the
explanations for-
scope of what
Exactly.
God can do. Yeah.
Exactly. But the problem of evil is one where if you accept that, if you accept their premises, then there is no God. And that's the conclusion. They apparently have just blown that out of the water, so I'll take their word on that one.
So they have a whole other episode that covers the problem of evil.
Yes.
Where they claim to have completely debunked it.
Exactly.
And I guess I'll have to take a look at that in fairness, although...
Yeah, because that's actually kind of like the key argument for me.
Well, one of
That's
the things
my
that,
pet one, in a
yeah,
way.
and it is for a lot of people because it's strong, and there are some problems with it in where it only argues against a specific type of
Exactly.
God. For example, if you think your God is not always benevolent, if you think he can be cruel,
Yeah.
then it doesn't eliminate your kind of
yeah.
God. But I think part of the problem that I see with this kind of discussion of the problem of evil as the silver bullet and whatever, and the fact that they've done a whole episode on this. On the one hand, in fairness, I want to go listen to their episode and discussion. And on the other hand, I shouldn't need to. Because a lot of times people will call in and say, yes, you've analyzed this and you've talked about this and you've thought about this, but have you heard of this guy? And but have you heard of this argument? And but have you heard of this one and this one and this one and on down the line? And eventually they find one that I haven't heard of or haven't read and haven't really studied, and they'll say, aha, that one's different. That's the one you really need to go pay attention to.
Why didn't they mention that one first then?
And it's
If it's so key.
absolutely absurd, and I don't want to pretend that I have this vast expanse of knowledge on the subject. But the fact of the matter is, if someone had come up with a scientific proof of the existence of God, if someone had come up with a sound logical argument that demonstrated that God existed, it'd be front page news and everybody would know about it. It wouldn't be this one apologist has got this particular argument that you haven't addressed yet. It'd be everywhere. We'd all know it.
Yeah.
And in fairness, I'll go and look at these arguments and listen to them, and 99% of the time, it's exactly the same as some other argument. It's phrased slightly differently. Yeah. It tries to obscure things a little more, and it's nothing new. It's not logically sound. It's not good evidence.
Well, theism is something that theism and atheism and religion and stuff has been around for a couple thousand years. Depending on which religion you're talking about, several thousands of years for religion as a whole. There's not too much new stuff out there for them or us. Most of it's been hashed out pretty well as of about maybe 500 years ago. Pretty much all the bases were covered, so there's not too much new material coming out, sorry to say.
A lot of it boils down to, as we talked about before, kind of epistemology. How do you know what you know? Exactly. How do you go about determining what's the best course for coming to an understanding of reality, and how do you distinguish between what you know and what's believable and what's plausible from what's not?
Exactly.
And eventually, all of these arguments end up coming back to one or 2 points, which is, I believe it based on faith and don't need evidence, something that I dealt with yesterday with somebody I was having a discussion with. And the other one is, well, there must be a first cause, because I can't think of any way that it could happen without a first cause, and therefore that cause must be intelligent. Yeah. And that's another thing I've dealt with in the past week. You get back to these two same basic points.
Yeah, it's argument from ignorance is always a big one too, as in, I can't see how this would have happened.
Right.
Therefore, it must be a God. God the gaps.
Yeah.
In another
If
form.
God didn't create the universe and had it happen, well, you can't come up with anything, then God wins.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
Sorry.
There are more options than just God did it, or we have an answer pat right here.
Yeah. The big
There's more
option,
than
the
that.
important one is we don't know.
Exactly.
If you'd asked questions about, for example, evolution 1,000 years ago, the answer would have been, we don't know. We don't have a good explanation for the diversity of life on Earth. Now we do.
Yeah.
This idea that you should have an answer and the correct answer to anything that you want to know right now is one of the most colossally arrogant and stupid things that I think I've ever heard.
Yeah. Well, it's a very comforting thing of religion
Yeah.
that it does offer pat answers. And right here, right now, God did it. No further discussion necessary.
Magic man done
exactly. You can just be happy in the knowledge that God did it. And go on with your day.
And this is the point that I tried to make to somebody the other day, which is when you posit the existence of God, for example, as the first cause argument explanation does for like the Occam cosmological argument or whatever, you are attempting to answer a mystery with a mystery.
Yeah.
That's not how you do things. That's not the way you arrive at an answer. You've provided essentially a non-answer. You have wiped away any further investigation, any good, sound process for determining what the truth is. You've just, aha, here's the answer, and I'm going to accept it, even though it doesn't tell me anything about what I wanted to know. So we kind of got sidetracked, but you were
Yes.
talking about problem of evil.
And again, I will listen to that show because I do want to know. I don't know if we'll talk about it on this show or not, but I want to catch it. But the next point to go on is the presumption, what they call the presumption of atheism. And also how atheism, according to them at least, has been redefined relatively recently to mean lack of belief. Apparently, atheism, I'll say 10 years ago, meant there is no God. I'm an atheist, therefore I say there is no God, versus I don't believe in a God or haven't seen sufficient evidence or whatever. And so they're basically saying that we have skirted our burden of proof, we have dodged that bullet of having to defend our beliefs because we can just claim that, well, we just don't have that belief, and therefore we don't have to defend it. Again, that's not really a valid point because, again, atheism, as far as I know, has pretty much always been a lack of belief. Gnosticism deals with what you know. Agnostics don't know, Gnostics know, theists believe, atheists don't believe. So most people, again, in general, are agnostic atheists or agnostic theists. They believe that there's God, but they admit that they don't know this for a fact. They don't have solid evidence, proof, or anything like that, but they believe anyway. But most of the writings that say atheism is assertion that there is no God are usually religious texts. I know I went to one of the Christian bookstores a couple times in the past, and I just spent an hour or two going through their shelves, looking up, different books and saying, okay, let's see what they have to say about atheism. Pretty much every single one, save one maybe, was saying atheists claim there is no God. And okay, close that one on to the next one. None of them had it right, and again, this was just as of a year or two ago. So it's still out there. So what they are so another argument that they had is, okay, if atheists get this nice easy dodge,
Well,
then okay, you've got more to
yeah,
add?
because there's something to add to that.
Okay.
This idea that that atheism as a lack of belief is something new. And I heard this portion of the podcast, and they were claiming that atheists rely on word etymology and disregard what atheism means to the general public. On the one hand, they're correct. They're correct in the sense that when, for example, dictionaries don't provide dogmatic definitions of words. Dictionaries provide examples of usage. A dictionary, the meaning of the word as you find it in the dictionary changes over time because usage changes. Language evolves, just like so many other things. But there is a valid point about the word etymology, about what it originally meant, what sort of possible valid meanings it may have. When the average person on the street talks about an atheist, they may in fact be talking about somebody who actually posits and believes that there is no such thing as a God. Depending on definitions, I'm that kind of atheist. However, when most atheists talk about this, and this is a kind of a strong principle, they're talking about a lack of belief in a God. They're not asserting an absolute positive assertion that there is no God. And in fairness, when we're talking about labels like this that might label a philosophical position, the people who are using it to identify themselves should be the ones whose usage becomes the norm. You don't get to define what I am, I get to define that. And when atheists in general are talking about a lack of belief in a God, then that's the usage that we really need to discuss, even if 90% of the population has a different usage and they've gotten it wrong, because we're using it to describe ourselves.
Yeah.
If you go back in time, one of the things we learned from Athenagoras of Athens in around 300 CE was that Christians were called atheists by the Romans. And the reason was that they didn't believe in the Roman gods. It wasn't that they didn't believe in any god. It was that they didn't believe in the Roman gods. They didn't believe in those gods, and that made them atheists. And Athenagoras, trying to say, no, he was a Christian, he said, no, that's not true at all. We are not atheists. We do believe in a God. We don't have this idea of the material world is all that exists. We're not like those nasty Greeks who were real atheists. They don't believe in any of the gods. And still, there's a slight difference between asserting that they don't believe in any of the gods to they believe that no gods exist. There's a slight difference there. So even as far back as you want to go, atheism does include within it this idea of a lack of a belief.
Yeah. And also, typically in our discussions, atheism typically means lack of belief, only because God is such a nebulous term. You've got everyone who said, you've got people who say that God is in absolutely everything. He is all knowing, all loving, all caring, all present. He affects your life daily, and he heals people at his whim. And then you've got other people on the other end of the spectrum who say, well, God is math.
Yeah.
Math is God. God is just in the workings of nature.
Yeah, if you're saying that God is math and that's it,
then I'm a theist.
Me too. God exists. Math is a principle, the way of it's a language to describe reality.
Yeah. So as a general rule, if I say I'm an atheist, that means I lack of belief in a God, because for 90% of people's definition of a God, I don't believe in that. Now, for specific ones, again, if you bring out the three omni God, that God in my book does not exist.
Cannot exist.
Problem of evil.
And
As far as
50,000
I know,
other objections.
completely refutes that God.
Yeah.
Cannot exist.
And I think there's plenty of others.
I'm a hard atheist.
Yeah.
In that respect.
Yeah. Depending on what God you propose.
Exactly.
We may or may not be atheists. But in fairness, we live in I don't want to be United States kind of biased or centric, but we live in a country where 80 to 90% of the people believe in a God, and they believe in a particular type of God. Yeah. When Dawkins, in his new book, The God Delusion, and some others have written, one of the most common objections that we get are these kind of intellectual theologians who come out and say, oh, well, you see, Dawkins and company aren't arguing against any real concept of God. Nobody actually believes the kind of God that they're refuting. So they haven't refuted God at all. God must exist still. And that's BS. If you go around and ask the general public to describe what their belief in God is, you very much get something that matches up with one of the things that Dawkins and Dennett and Harris and Stenger have talked about. They are refuting God as God is generally conceived. If you think that God is, and to kind of steal from Russell yesterday, for this first cause argument, if you think God is this single particle that exists off by itself and it served as the first cause, you've got a very unique notion of God, one that I don't necessarily have a problem with, because you're not positing anything supernatural, you're not implying anything about the characteristics of that God, you're not even asserting that it's intelligent. So I don't have an objection to that. But that's not what most people mean when they talk about God. And it's completely unfair to say, if 90% of the population believes in some kind of personal God, or let's cut that down, 70% believe in some kind of personal God. And I write a book that completely demonstrates why this notion of a personal God who interacts with the material world, with reality, cannot exist. And some scholar comes back and says, well, yes, but of course, none of us are proposing the idea of a personal God. That's antiquated, medieval thinking. You're not being honest. What those scholars are, they're atheists. They have rejected the general notion of God, but yet they still want to cling on to the label so that they can fit in with everybody else when they need to. They're dishonest, and their rebuttals of like Dawkins' work and stuff are equally dishonest. At least when I'm on here and I make claims, I realize not everybody's a young earther, not everybody's believes in Jesus, not everybody accepts notions of Trinity or whatever, but I'm not picking obscure beliefs about God to ridicule. All right, I did do a show on Scientology, so,
But depending on where you are, they are actually very popular. So
yeah, if you're in Hollywood.
Exactly. If you take this show out to LA, man, you've got an audience there. So.
Well, we might have to touch Scientology again soon, because I miss making fun of L. Ron Hubbard.
But one interesting thing I did have before we go on to calls in just a second.
Sure.
Is, again, they're saying that we're able to dodge the issue of burden of proof and such because, we're just claiming lack of belief. Then what they are going to do is just become a-atheists.
Oh, how clever of you.
A-humanists. And they just lack the belief that there isn't a God. In which case, I fully support them on that. I will completely support their belief that they don't believe that there is. I will support the belief that they don't have a belief that there isn't a God. Anyone can believe any kind of wackiness or completely true stuff that they want. It's when they start saying that this is a reflection of reality, that's where I have a problem.
Bingo.
So,
yeah, so we're atheists, and evidently they portrayed that as we've cleverly avoided the burden of proof.
Exactly.
Because they admitted in the show that under normal circumstances, if they asserted that there was a God, they'd have the burden of proof. Thank you for at least being honest there before you so cleverly decided to be dishonest. Since you were unable to meet your burden of proof, that is the reason why I don't accept your claim. And I don't have a burden of proof because of that. And if you think it's clever to say that now you're going to be an a-atheist in order to avoid the burden of proof, great. Now neither one of us is asserting anything, neither one of us has a burden of proof, and you're stuck because what you really do believe is now completely asinine. Oh wait, it was asinine before. Now you're just avoiding the obvious fact that it's asinine. But I don't know. We'll get back to that and listen to some more of them. But since we're on a different time and we actually do have callers, I want to go ahead and take some callers and encourage everybody to call in and talk about this and other subjects. And as a reminder, this is the one and only week, as far as we know, that we'll be on from 1:30 to 3. Beginning next week, we're going to shift times again from 3 to 4:30. So we went from 4:36 to 1:30 to 3, and now we're hitting the middle, 3 to 4:30. So, please, if you enjoyed watching the show and you want to call in, follow us around. There's the information up on the screen. On the air, we got Steve. How you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Pretty good. Can barely hear you. Let me.
Oh, I'll try and speak up.
Oh, you're good. I think it was our speaker.
Well, just a comment about the a-atheists.
Yeah.
If they're, as long as they make no posits about the existence of a God, they can be an a-atheist.
Yep,
so
exactly.
To be an a-atheist, they cannot tell us any stories about a God. They can't tell us what God is or whatever. They just have to say, I don't believe there isn't one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
As soon as they start saying stuff about what he does, what he wants, what he is, they're doing a lot more than just not believing in one.
Exactly.
Not believing in not believing one.
Yep.
Exactly.
And that's where the dishonesty in their attempted cleverness really shows through.
Well, the other weirdness of their attempted cleverness is, let's say we said, you're right, atheist really is the wrong word. So we'll make up a new word for people who just plain don't believe in a God.
Yeah,
make up
sane.
whatever word you want. Now,
Sane is one I'd
about that.
They're now asane.
Yeah, so it doesn't help them much. There's still plenty of people out there that believe in that form, and that's who they're arguing with. And I guess that's basically what you were just saying. So.
Yeah.
No, that's fine. One of the things is we end up repeating ourselves a lot and answering some of the same questions and saying the same thing 3 or 4 different ways. That doesn't bother me a bit. As much as I might hate to repeat myself in conversation, sometimes saying something 3 or 4 different ways is the only way that you're going to get through to a broader audience. Maybe
Well,
the way you phrased it is better.
Well, I feel bad just repeating it back to you in a way.
You're not repeating it back to me. You're repeating it back to everybody who's listening.
Yeah.
And there's tons. We have a huge audience for this 1 week in the new time slot.
That's right. My comment that I wanted to call about, though, was about simplicity, and sometimes people use the idea of Occam's razor as sort of a way, when you have two arguments that you can really balance out, I want to say all other things being equal, and you can use these more simple to comprehend as being, or just simple explanation as being more likely to be true.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Well, you don't always get presented things with that all things being equal, so you can't use it as the only way to determine things.
Right.
But my point was more about when you learn how something works, like let's say the Earth revolves around the sun because you've learned that there is a force of gravity. Even if you can't do the equations yourself, you know that there are equations that can predict the orbit. And once you know that, for the rest of your life, you don't have to go to a revival tent. You do not need to have anybody recharge you in understanding that that's how it works. You know it from that, and that explanation is that truth or explanation makes so much sense. And you know what? If you had to, you could probably go back and reconstruct it and actually come close to proving it, or depending on your skills. Whereas some of these arbitrary proclaimments about what's going on, and when you talk about apologetics, bizarre arguments that are kind of twisted and kind of hard. Well, wait a minute, what are you saying? How does this work again? They just need continual support, refreshment, revival tents, etc., to just keep propping them up, because they just can't stand on their own.
Yeah, I think that is an absolutely critical point that we don't hit often enough, and that's this idea that the truth shouldn't need to hide itself away from investigation, and what is true definitely shouldn't require constant reinforcement. In so many religions, you have this notion of, for example, among Christians, there's this idea of being a backslider, somebody who's fallen away from the flock and from the ideas, and that you need to constantly walk with God and constantly read and study and pray in order to stay within this mindset. And that is so... I can't even come up with a good word for it. It's silly to think that if something is really true, and they proclaim to have a truth that is intrinsically true, that is so critically true and obvious once you understand it, that it kind of proves itself that it is this blatant obvious truth. Regular truth doesn't need constant reinforcement. And this specialized truth that they're claiming definitely shouldn't need that kind of constant reinforcement. If it's so easy to find yourself falling away from it, then maybe it's not true.
Right.
I mean,
The only pitfall about this path of talking about this is that there are some sort of scientific things that really take a lot of preparation to get the background such that you can actually approach them and understand them. And therefore, they are in some ways more difficult to arrive at because it takes, a lot of training in order to get to the point where you really understand what's going on. And you could argue, if you use the simple Occam's razor thing, you go, well, this is a lot easier. It's just they tell me so, and so it's true.
See, that's not really it, though. Let me pause for a second. Occam's razor is often represented as all things being equal, the simplest answer is most likely correct. That's pretty much true, but that's not really what Occam's razor is. Occam's razor, at its core, is you're not supposed to unnecessarily multiply entities, and that's too confusing for anybody to really kind of grasp. You have to dig a little deeper. And what it is that the idea of simplicity within Occam's razor is not the same as what the common usage of simple is. For example, some people would say, well, the simplest answer I can possibly give is God did it. But that's not a simple answer at all. That's a very complex answer. It's answering a mystery with a mystery, as I pointed out. The actual answer itself includes so many questions, and you are positing unknowns and trying to explain things in terms of unknowns. When Occam's razor refers to unnecessarily, positing entities or multiplying them, when Occam's razor in its new form refers to simplicity. What it's talking about is let's explain things in terms of the known. Let's include the fewest unknown elements as possible in our explanation. And that understanding of simplicity eliminates the notion that answers like God did it are somehow simple when they're not.
Right. It just because a simple pen can use an answer doesn't make it a simple answer.
Right. Just
Anyway,
because it has
thanks
fewer
for,
words.
Thanks for letting me chip in. I really enjoy your show.
Thanks, Steve.
Have a good
Appreciate
day.
it.
Thanks for
and
calling.
thanks for moving over to the new time with us, and hopefully we'll get you to move over to the other time. As a reminder, normally we would go to Thread Guilds after the show. That's kind of temporarily on hiatus. Hate us? If you hate us, it's on hiatus. And today we're going to Dog and Duck. It's the 17th of Guadalupe. The show's over at 3 o'clock, just less than an hour away. And we'll be down there roughly 3:30, 3:45-ish at the outside. Maybe even a little bit earlier. Who knows? But you're welcome to come down and join us. Any atheist-friendly person, you can come down. But if you come down to preach at us, try and start an argument or have a debate, call the phone number, send us an email. If you want to actually come down for a friendly discussion, I don't mind that at all. We've had that before. We've
Yes.
had some theists to come down to say, I think you've made a mistake here, or I didn't quite understand the point, or maybe would you be willing to have a discussion about this particular aspect of something? And all day long. These are some. I don't just do this show because I think the show's important. I most definitely do. I'd like to clear up misunderstandings about atheists and atheism, but I am utterly and completely fascinated with the subjects of religion, philosophy, epistemology, all kinds of things. And I love having discussion. I spend, some would say, way too much time actually in online debates, et cetera. So, yeah, I don't want to discourage anybody. But as a reminder, we'll be at Dog and Duck. And we've got, is it Don?
Yes.
Hey, how you doing, Don?
Good. How are you?
Pretty good.
Yes, I was wondering, could you please tell me the difference between secular humanism and atheism? I've been listening to a lot of skeptical podcasts lately, and it seems that people stray away from atheism and label themselves as secular humanism, and I was wondering if there's any difference.
Well, there is, in the sense that atheism is only a lack of belief. For example, Buddhists don't, some of them do, but most Buddhists don't have any belief in an actual God. And so they're atheists, even though they're Buddhists. So they're atheists, but not secular humanists. Secular humanism is kind of a philosophy that is based on materialism and naturalism, and that says that we are the ones who are able to solve our own problems, that we cannot rely on any outside guidance or divine intervention or superstitious or supernatural intervention, so atheism could be included under the umbrella of secular humanists, because in most secular humanists, I would say all, I guess, are atheists. But you don't, just because you're an atheist doesn't mean you're necessarily a secular humanist. You could have any number of philosophical or religious beliefs that are consistent with atheism.
All right, great. Thank you.
Sure. That it?
Yeah, that's it for
Okay.
me. Thanks.
Thanks for calling, Don. That's a good one.
Yeah,
because there's
it's-
some discussion within our group about,
There's a lot of different words going around: atheist, secular humanist, free thinker, bright.
Yeah, I know
And so-
people. I know people who are atheists and who I can have discussions with, and they'll agree with me on all sorts of different things about whether or not there is a God, et cetera, and even perhaps without supernatural, and yet they choose a different label.
Yeah.
They don't like the atheist label because it has been denigrated from the pulpit and completely misunderstood and equated with communism, and the McCarthy scare and everything else. And I could do the same thing. I could say, you know what? I'd rather not use the atheist label. I'm actually a free thinker, a secular humanist, a rationalist, a naturalist, materialist.
Yeah.
Whatever. I could pick I could go with Buddhist as long as you get rid of any supernatural nonsense of reincarnation and crap
and such,
and
yeah.
cosmic karma and justice. But so probably Buddhist wouldn't really fit that well. But I don't. I choose atheist for a particular reason, and it goes back to what we were talking about at the beginning, in how most people use the word atheist. They're talking about somebody who doesn't believe in a God, somebody who perhaps believes that there is no God. That label best is one of the best that to apply to what I happen to think, and I see nothing negative in it. I see no reason for atheist as a label or atheism as a label to be a sort of stigma or in any way negative, and so I use the label. It's on the banner above us. It's on the TV screen. It's on, the
We're not
atheist
shying
philosophy.
away, if you haven't noticed.
And hopefully what this does is, while I'm sure that there's some people who consider me, nasty or polemic or arrogant, elitist, whatever, hopefully what it does is demonstrate that we're just like everybody else. The one key difference is that we're not accepting claims about a God or the existence of any kind of deity or supernatural crap or...
Yeah.
Oh, did I say crap? Oh, yeah, I did. Sorry.
On a Sunday afternoon, how could you? All right. Next thing that they go on to here, and this took up basically the rest of the show. They kept diving back into this, was the idea of physicalists or physicalism. I can't remember the exact term, but basically the outlook on the outlook on the world that everything can be explained by physics and chemistry. And there's nothing that can't be explained by that. And I can kind of get their point. I know where they're coming from with that.
They're kind of hitting against philosophical materialism and scientific naturalism, yeah.
Exactly. And they're basically saying that there are certain things that cannot be explained by those two processes.
Did they give any examples? Because I've never heard one.
Appreciation of art.
It can't be...
Emotions.
It's either wrong.
Ideas. Depending on what you want to reduce these things to, yes, they can be. Depending on how you want to reduce things, you can describe love in words and expressions and pictures. If you then want to convert that down into a computer, you can have love described as nothing but 1 and 0. That's it. It's possible. And so, yes.
There's more, though.
Okay.
The experiential aspect of love
Yes.
can actually be reduced down to electrochemical states of the brain.
Biochemicals.
And not just that there's one state that is love, but a broad spectrum of states that are different expressions of love, different understandings of love. But the fact that we don't necessarily have a hard and fast, specific, complete explanation that is rooted in scientific naturalism or materialism doesn't mean that it can't be explained by those. All it means is that we don't necessarily have an explanation
Haven't
now.
or don't have one
In
yet.
order for them to say that there are things that cannot be explained in terms of the material world, they need to come up with an example of something that actually cannot be explained, not something that has not currently been properly or fully explained. Those are very different things. They're asserting something. The scientific naturalism is a way of going about saying it's not a complete disregard for supernatural explanations. It's we're going to try and explain everything in natural terms because so far everything that we've really sought to has been. And those things that haven't appear to be that way. There's no good reason to posit anything supernatural. There's no good reason to think any of it exists. There's nothing that so far can only be explained by supernatural. No demonstration that, of the phenomena. Yeah. There's $1 million prize for anybody who can do it. Nobody bothers. Well, some people try, but...
And it's also the fact that science deals with the natural world, things that can be repeatable and you can test. If you have to throw in some kind of supernatural cause here, then that's basically a black box that we cannot possibly understand. And I always think about that Far Side cartoon where they've got the scientists up with a huge math problem on the board, and then it says, and a miracle happened.
Yeah.
And then money, or whatever. Yeah. If you're going to have to throw in some kind of supernatural cause, then anything you do before or after means absolutely nothing, because who knows what this black box of supernaturalism or God or whatever did. It just poof, it happened, and there you go.
And the one thing we talked about the last time you were on when Vic Stinger was here as well is this idea that perhaps something supernatural actually exists. We can say nothing about it in the black box sense that you're talking about. But if you're claiming that your God actually interacts with the material world, then those are effects that we should be able to measure, quantify, observe, etc. If you have the claim, for example, that prayer intercessory prayer actually works, then when we test intercessory prayer, we should find that it works. And in actuality, every time we do, we find that it doesn't work. If you claim that you can read people's minds, then when we test to find that out, it should be clear that you can. And what we find is that, mind reading, astrology, psychometry, all these other New Age nonsense ideas, when tested, come out to be no more reliable than chance, which pretty much tells us they don't exist. They haven't been demonstrated at all. Now, there may be some guy in some foreign place who's tapped into some cosmic truth and has all kinds of powers, but he hasn't come forward to demonstrate that any of them are true. And anytime they've been tested and people who claim to sincerely believe they have these, it's excuse after excuse. Oh, there's a skeptic in the room and he's generating bad energy, which is offsetting this. Or, oh, it doesn't always work. Doesn't always work? Can you demonstrate any time when it has worked? If I flip a coin and you predict it, after a number of tosses, you're probably going to get it right about half the time. If you can't do any better than that, what on earth makes you think that you're psychic? If you can't beat 50%, if you can't beat the odds, then you're just like me. I don't have any psychic power, and I can get heads or tails 50% of the time, roughly.
Also, their show is a live call-in, apparently.
Yeah.
I think it's just in LA or something like that.
No, I think they had a 188 number. 1888 number.
Okay.
But
How exactly? But obviously, to dial in, you have to be able to hear it live. And I don't know where they broadcast to. So, but anyway, they do have callers, and they had this little old lady call in. And her first statement was, "Atheists are atheists because we can rid ourselves of guilt. Since we're not responsible or accountable to any god or higher power, then we just get to live happy lives and go around and do whatever we want and don't have to be responsible about it." I have a big problem with that, only because that's essentially you can argue that both ways. Christians have the exact same problem. They have this moral blank check that they've been given by God, which says, as long as you say, "I'm sorry, I believe," then you can do whatever you want. And this temporary little stay on earth, which doesn't really mean anything because it's actually just kind of lead up to the eternal life in heaven, then anything you do down here doesn't matter. You kill 35 people and you scam another 55 more. Hey, oops, I'm sorry.
Deathbed confession.
Exactly. On your deathbed, my God, Jesus, you're my Savior.
I don't know
There
why
you
I
go.
didn't see it before I killed all those people.
Exactly. And then you're saved. And that's all it takes. And for some brands of Christianity, it doesn't even take that. If when you're 5 years old, you say, "Oh yes, Jesus is my Savior," then even if you backslide, doesn't matter.
Once
you're
saved,
saved
always
once,
saved.
always saved.
There's another problem with what she said, and that's this notion that atheists aren't accountable to any higher power. We are. We're accountable to ourselves. We're accountable to our friends and family. We're accountable to other people in society. We're accountable to the law. We are accountable to all things that are real and actually frickin' matter. Just because we're not accountable to your magic man, who is, by the way, less moral than any atheist I know,
Yeah.
is irrelevant. I'm accountable because I live in a cooperative society, because I actually give a crap about the other people around me. This claim that, oh, we just want to live terrible, sinful lives, that's nonsense. There's no evidence that atheists are any more sinful or evil or bad than Christians. And as a matter of fact, if you watch the news, I think you'll find that the opposite may in fact be true. I'm not saying that Christianity necessarily leads to doing bad things. We certainly see quite a bit of it.
It certainly doesn't stop it.
Yeah.
So.
And I'll say that you've got folks like Falwell, for example, who is dead. I thought I'd just mention that. Who did a lot of things that he claimed were good, but actually weren't good at all. One of them is, and I guess now is as good a time as any to kind of go on my
Sure.
side rant,
Go
because
for
it
it.
kind of relates to Falwell. I guess during this year's graduation, there was some discussion in Texas about whether or not the schools should allow religious speeches. Hopefully, those that did allow managed to get some kind of non-sectarian speech, but they shouldn't have had them at all. It's a violation of the separation of church and state, which I really wish more people would actually understand and grasp. So if you're a Christian sitting at home, or some other religionist, although I think most of the rest of you probably get this since you're not in the majority, pay attention for a few minutes. In Jacksonville, Florida, the class valedictorian in one of the schools got up the other day to give the speech. And in that speech, she talked about her love for Jesus and how Jesus was all important and how we were burdened with sin and how all the people out in the audience who didn't accept Jesus would descend into hell because of that burden of sin. And some people are pretty ticked off about this, and with very good reason. There's no reason for us to take a good cause for celebration and turn it into a divisive piece of sectarian crap where you get to spew your moral high ground and threaten everybody else out there. It's obscene and it's absurd. A lot of schools, especially younger elementary schools, have what's known as backpack mail, where they send home flyers and things with the kids, the information that needs to get to parents. And some of it deals with school schedules and maybe lunch menus and special events. Some of it also deals with things that are going on in the community that are outside the school, but things that teachers or parents and students might want to know about. Maybe there's going to be some big picnic in the park, and they want to get the word out. A soccer game, whatever. But they had a good policy, one of these schools, that the message that you sent out in the backpack was not allowed to be partisan, sectarian, political, or religious. Good policy. Make sure that we're not marginalizing different groups. Make sure that we're not being divisive. And yet Jerry Falwell's organization went to the school district and said, you know what? We don't think this is really very fair. We'd like to remove this exclusion of religion so that we can actually hand out religious flyers and information to these kids. And the school district, and some of you out there won't believe this, said yes. Sure, you can do that. We had this completely workable policy, but now we're going to make an exception for religion. Despite the First Amendment, despite what's actually right, we're going to go ahead and make an exception. And if I'd have heard about this, I'd have ranted about it a long time ago. This is asinine completely, but that's okay. Because what happened was a few pagans from the Unitarian Universalist Church took advantage of this new decision and sent the kids home with some flyers about paganism. Guess what happened next? The Christians threw a fit. Some of them even threatened to sue, and they were sitting there talking about how, oh, this is terrible. You're poisoning the minds of our children, and oh, I've never laughed so hard in my life. Welcome to a wonderful taste of your own stupidity. So many of these people falsely proclaim to support religious freedom and freedom of expression, and really all they care about is the freedom to express their religion. As soon as somebody else does it, it's a problem. Also, they sent these students home with some information on Camp Quest, or the Freethinkers camp, the camp where we don't bother to try and pump kids full of Jesus talk. Oh boy, they threw a fit about that too. So now they're all up in arms, and this wonderfully good idea that these people were pushing has backfired on them. And in a stunning stroke of irony, one of the women who was so vocally opposed to this pagan literature said that this is an abomination, we should get rid of this pagan literature, and I sincerely hope that we bring God back to school because we need him.
That's
Can you
just
get-
what you did.
Can you get more ironic? You made a move to bring your God back to school, and you were forced by religious freedom to let anybody bring their God back to school. And now you're going to complain and say you can't allow that. You can't allow them to do that, but you should allow us to bring our God back to school. You complete ignorant hypocrite. How about this? If you've got a blank piece of paper, is that piece of paper an advertisement for atheism? There's nothing on it. There's a cartoon I saw recently where you've got a couple guys going door to door, handing out a pamphlet, and the guy looks at it and says, "There's nothing on this," and they say, "Yeah, we're atheists." There was a brilliant essay written last year that we actually talked about. A guy went to, I think it was Hawaii, and attended a high school football game.
Yes.
He was thrilled to find out that before the football game started, they were actually going to have a prayer. Until they started the prayer. And it turned out to have been some sort of Hawaiian tribal traditional prayer. And he was shocked and offended. But he didn't throw a fit like this stupid person who I just finished talking about. What he did was he came to a very important realization, and that is keeping church and state separate protects everybody of all religions. This isn't about making sure your religion stays protected. It's about protecting everybody's right to believe what they want. It's about protecting everybody's free expression and everybody's free religion. And this person who used to favor school prayer is now opposed to school prayer because he saw what it was like to be on the other side of it. And it doesn't matter, for example, if this valedictorian in Jacksonville, instead of talking about Jesus, had talked about Muhammad, I think some people might have got a clue. If instead of talking about Jesus, she'd have preached about Scientology, I think even more people might have caught on. And one of these days, maybe some people will realize, maybe most of us will realize, that the best course of action is to completely keep them separate. You can have a wonderful celebration, you can have a normal day, and have your own beliefs. You can even express them in public to other people who are interested. But when you're involved in official state-sponsored actions, when you're there to represent a diverse community, to actually be sectarian, divisive, most people start to get that. But what they don't get is that they often say we need some kind of nonpartisan appeal to God. Hello? It doesn't matter that you've removed your partisanship. You've ignored this one divide between your appeal to God and people who think that that's absolutely insane. Why would you need to appeal to God? Why do you need to tell us about the fact that you need to appeal to God? I'm not saying keep it all to yourself. You're free to proselytize. You're just not free to do it in public settings that are state-sponsored, like school graduations and things. There's no reason for it to be there. And everybody benefits if it's not. You maintain your rights. You maintain your beliefs. And you don't have to worry about yourself being offended or you offending someone else. That's the way you build a cooperative community. That's the way you have and express true freedom. And it's absolutely obscene to me to think that this is still going on, where people are trying to circumvent good laws, good rules. And then when it backfires, oh, wait a minute, I didn't think about that. Why don't you think before you act? Do us all a favor. But that's my rant for this week. No. We don't need a rant for this. We'll go on to Pete, since he's been waiting for a while. How you doing, Pete?
Hey, how's it going?
Good.
I had a question. Why do you believe that how you were created, man was created?
I don't believe that that's an accurate word for it.
Okay, exist.
Evolution in the beginning of life pretty well explains how life, from when we had the first life and biological chemicals to us. We've got a pretty good idea of how that all happened.
Scientifically, evolution, that's what you believe?
Yes.
Okay, what about the Earth? How did it get created?
Getting a lot out of scope here, but yeah, somebody mentioned going to the fact. In general, again, cosmology explains that fairly well.
We have a fairly good understanding of how stars form and how planets form. Yeah. We may not know everything about it. They may not necessarily be the most correct answers, but they are in fact the most reasonable and most plausible. And I'm not running around preaching that evolution is necessarily the absolute truth, or that the geological formation of the Earth is absolute truth. But what I am going to say is that out of the possible explanations, this one is the most plausible. And in fact, evolution is a fact. It is an observed phenomena. And fine-tuning explanations for how it works is one little element of it. But at this stage, while we don't know everything and we may not have a perfect explanation, the explanations are so plausible, so probable, that any other explanation has a strong hurdle to overcome if it wants to kind of dethrone what the consensus is.
Yeah, because I've read the Darwin's Theory, and recently they've been like backtracking some of the stuff that was written.
Well, the thing, if you're talking about like Darwin's Origin of Species, the original from 1850 or 1862, yeah, there were ideas in there. One of the things is that Darwin came up, basically his position or his writing was about the observations that he'd made with perhaps, the finches. He didn't know of a mechanism for this change. His hypothesis really was that over long periods of time, differences occur, and eventually they spread and things become more different, and that this would be a sufficient explanation for the diversity of life, provided, number one, that we could demonstrate that there was a long enough period of time for this to happen, which we later did, and number two, we could demonstrate a mechanism for it, which we also later did. DNA, the self-replicating DNA, mistakes are made, random mutations occur, they are acted upon by this idea of natural selection, where so many people kind of misunderstand what this is. It's not any conscious effort by a creature to change, to adapt to its environment. It's the environment that we live in is constantly changing, and there are a myriad factors that are constantly affecting whether or not something reproduces, whether or not it thrives, lives, etc. You can have catastrophic destructions in one area that are going to wipe out species, and then you're going to have mutations which are temporarily beneficial but become detrimental later when the conditions change, and that's natural selection acting on it, and it filters out. It acts like a sieve, like if you were panning for gold. You pan through, and one layer of sieve removes some particles that weren't fit enough to get through. It's not the idea of survival of the fittest is the strongest or anything like that. The important thing, though, is that this idea that what do you believe about how you were created, that automatically assumes that we're a creation. It kind of assumes what it's stating. The correct question would be, how did life arise? And that doesn't say that, because I've had people call in and say, as I mentioned before, well, if God didn't create the universe, then how did it happen? Or actually what they'll ask sometimes is, if God didn't create the universe, who did? And that question assumes that the who is an answer. It may be a who. We don't know. To any absolute degree of certainty. But we do know, to beyond a reasonable doubt, to a relative degree of certainty about all kinds of things. Evolution and how it occurs. Stanley Miller, who recently died, who was part of the Miller-Urey experiments, that demonstrated that in a particular atmosphere with nothing more than inert, non-living, natural elements in a soup with electricity applied, you can produce amino acids, the very building blocks of life. Now, the atmosphere that he used didn't exactly match Earth's atmosphere, but that's irrelevant. What he demonstrated is that life from non-life is absolutely, without doubt, possible. Did it actually occur here in the same way? Probably not. Maybe it occurred somewhere else and migrated here. Maybe it occurred here in a different way. But the fact that life from non-life is a possibility is what that demonstrated conclusively. There's no doubt. You can get life from non-life under the right circumstances. Now, what happens to it after life, that's where evolution kicks in. Do we know everything? No. Like I said before, one of the best things we can learn to say consistently and frequently is, I don't know. But one of the objections is that scientists have some kind of global conspiracy to keep evolution going because that's where they get their funds from. That's false. If we could demonstrate that there was actually a good reason to think that a God existed, not only would that open up tons of new areas of research that scientists would leap to in order to be the first ones to get their studies published, but that's where all the money is. You don't think money is going to be, flowing like rivers to grants and funds that start working to prove this idea of God. The Catholic Church would melt down the Vatican to get that to happen. But
Okay, thank you very much.
thanks, Pete.
Okay.
So what else have we got? What
All
else
right.
did they talk about?
They did go on to about how do we know things, and talking about evolution, and their premise was, if evolution is true, then our senses are not reliable. What I see, feel, hear, stuff like that is not reliable. Because,
Why?
Because evolution promotes survival, not necessarily correct or good beliefs or ideas, or it's not concerned with what is true. It promotes simply survival. And they went off on a lot of tangents talking about tigers.
Hey, one second, because I'm not quite understanding this. It seems to me that when they say evolution only concerns itself with survival, that they're kind of anthropomorphizing the process, that evolution has some goal in mind. There is no thing,
Yeah.
evolution, no entity with any goal in mind. It's just change happens, that's it.
Yeah.
Change happens, and some changes are good enough to continue given the changing environment, and some aren't. There's no, I mean, the genes, even when you say, for example, Dawkins' book, The Selfish Gene, you look at it and we tend to kind of humanize it and say the gene has the goal of survival, of replicating. But it's not a thinking thing that is like, how can I make sure that I replicate? It's just the process, it's just what is.
Yeah.
So, I don't understand how that idea makes our senses unreliable.
Well, because our senses could be wrong, as long as they promote the correct behavior, then it's fine. And one of their extremely convoluted examples
Okay.
was the idea of involving tigers. If you have this sincere belief that tigers are good animals, and you sincerely believe that the best way to be close to a tiger is running away from it, then regardless of your beliefs, whether they be right or wrong or anything, the fact that in the end you're running away promotes your survival, then that belief will propagate.
Okay, I see what they're saying. They're saying that our senses don't necessarily have to tell us the truth. They only
Exactly.
have to tell us what we need to survive.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's, in a sense, true.
It is, if that's all we ever looked at.
Exactly.
The problem comes when we try to determine whether or not you and I actually have a similar perception of reality. Whether or not, and when we put this to the test, for example,
Yeah.
to test to find out whether or not our senses are reliable. If our senses told us that, in fact, running away from tigers was the best way to get close to them, one way to test it would be to go stand next to the tiger and find out whether or not that's true.
Yeah.
And we can do that. And there's also, we've discussed before, the kind of interreliability of the senses,
Yes.
where one confirms another, confirms another.
Exactly.
And you and I work together to find out whether or not
Yep.
it's possible. And this kind of comes up with solipsism, where I am the only person that exists. All of you are figments of my imagination. So is Ashley. Matter of fact, I can't say anything about reality. I don't know anything. All I know is what I experience, and I go ahead and define that as reality. And you know what? Even if all that was true, that's fine. I have no other possible course of action other than to rely on my senses, on what I experience.
Yeah.
What makes it justified is that it continually reproves itself and is consistent with somebody else's.
Yeah. Now, of course, their argument is that, well, since we were created by God, God created your senses to give you truth. They are honed specifically so that they're actually dealing with reality. And so they have a better explanation for things because what we're seeing is actually reality. We have an explanation for that. God didn't. And your idea of evolution could have done absolutely anything. And since that's not what we have, then you're wrong.
Oh,
And apparently they're right. So take that for what you will.
forgive me if I'm not overly convinced.
If we're not falling all over ourselves to tear the A down.
I have defined the situation such that you are wrong, and therefore you're wrong. You got me there.
And they do quite a bit of this on the show. They don't do a whole lot to say God exists,
Yeah.
or here is our evidence for God.
They're doing to philosophical arguments for God against God what creationists are doing against evolution, and
In a
basically
certain extent, yes.
we're saying no, this is wrong. You got this wrong. There's a gap here. There's this here, and therefore when your ideas are actually appear to be wrong enough, ours win.
Yeah, to a certain extent, but they're also almost creating straw men. Again, going after the physicalists, the idea that everything is chemistry and physics, and that's it. You can reduce things to that level, but not very often are discussions that we have involved at that level. I agree that there are emotions, and it's, I'm not going to say, well, that's just certain chemicals in your brain. These things are real, for lack of a better term. We can discuss psychology and how groups work
Right.
and things like that, even though I can't write them down in a mathematical equation.
Yet
Yet what?
can't
Yeah,
write them
it
down
could
in a
be.
mathematical equation yet.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
But you might someday.
Exactly, it could work one day. So what else is it here? Oh, yes, one of their last points before we get back to a caller. Talking about evolution and such, was saying that all atheists should, from an evolutionary standpoint, become theists, because since most people are theists, that would promote our survivability.
Nonsense.
So we would be more likely to find a mate, for perhaps.
I can raid the churches as an atheist. If you've managed to acquire all the hotties, I'll go to church.
Exactly. So.
No, I'm just kind of being silly there, because that argument deserves silliness. Well, because it represents a misunderstanding about evolution. It's still this whole thing about purpose.
Yeah.
And it also makes assumptions that you can determine what fittest actually means. That just because the majority happens to believe in a God, that idea is necessarily more fit for survival. That's false. That you only get to that point by committing a logical fallacy. It may in fact be that some other notion is most fit. Now, I'm perfectly willing to accept the possibility that a theistic worldview may turn out to be the most fit. We know that it has benefits early on, or we believe that it is based on principles that do have benefits, especially in young. Daniel Dennett's book, Breaking the Spell, Religion as a Natural Phenomena, goes on into this in great detail, where instead of actually believing, a lot of people actually believe in belief, and that this may actually be kind of a side effect or a byproduct of something which is very important, which is the idea that infants and little children should trust their parents. It's in their best interest. It benefits them to implicitly trust that their parents are correct. This develops a sort of mindset that has us accepting, without good reason, authority figures to tell us about reality. And it has a real benefit. I happen to think that, okay, once you get past those early years, the true benefit is questioning those authorities. They may in fact be right, but if they're right, you should be able to discover that they're right and why they're right. The truth doesn't have to be dogmatic in any way. But let's go on. We got, is it Kim?
Yes.
How you doing, Kim?
Good, thanks. I want to be respectful to you guys, even though I'm a Christian. I don't want to put you down, but as
Go ahead. I probably just put you down 3 or 4 times.
well, and I expect that for the most part. But really, what I want to ask you is, you just got done talking about authority and questioning authority, and really, to me, when I listen to you guys, it doesn't seem to me like you're willing to question, because there's a whole world to be discovered and explored within, in my opinion, the Bible. And I certainly did my homework.
Hang on for just a second, because this may or may not change your opinion. Is this the first time you've watched the show?
I channel surf, and
Okay.
I
You
watch.
may not actually realize that I was a fundamentalist Christian for many years, and was studying with the intent to be a preacher when I became an atheist. So it's not like I haven't examined and considered Christianity. It's not like I haven't examined and considered the Bible. Some people, I don't consider myself necessarily an expert, but some people might consider me an expert on the subject. It was and I didn't go looking for a reason not to believe. My pursuit, my study, was to specifically fulfill my obligation, 1 Peter 3:15, where I'm expected to provide an answer, a reason for the hope that I have. It was a way of finding out, were my beliefs actually justifiable? Was I able to give good reason for other people to believe this?
So you're real heavy into reason. I can hear that in the way you speak.
Sure.
You guys are kind of like intellectuals, and so you have to be convinced in your minds, is what I'm hearing.
Right. Where else would you be convinced?
You know, there are those who would say they are convinced within their hearts, within their
My
spirit.
heart does no thinking. It pumps blood.
Well, you know, your heart might just pump blood now that I'm thinking about it.
And your heart does more?
I definitely feel in my human experience something in my chest area
You should maybe see a doctor.
that leaps to the thought of a God. And you know, I want to challenge you.
I don't
what
want
if you're wrong? What are you doing with your future here?
Pascal's wager. What if I'm
What if
wrong?
you're wrong? Oh my God, what if you're wrong?
What if you're wrong?
What if you're wrong?
Hey, I got nothing to lose.
Nothing. What if the Buddhists are right? What if the Hindus are right? What if the Muslims are right? What if the Zoroastrians are right?
Well,
you have
gotta
nothing
pick,
to lose.
You got to pick which one you want. And
Right,
you know,
and I'm
I
picking-
choose the God that would die for me, not you know, I mean, to me, that's the man right there.
You pick the myth that's most comfortable to you. And what I'm saying is that I don't have any good reason to think that any of them are true, and I'm being intellectually honest and reasonable.
Well, I do believe
in
you're
rejecting...
being honest that you don't have faith, and that is a gift that God would give you if you wanted it.
Why would anybody want it? Why would you want to believe things without justification?
Oh, there's a myriad of justifications to believe,
Like what?
like life itself.
Life is proof of life. Life tells you nothing about how it got here until you investigate. And there's no reason to think that there's any kind of... Can you give a reason why there needs to be an intelligent creator?
Because I have no explanation for why I exist without
but
an
just
intelligent
because you
creator.
don't, but just because you don't doesn't mean somebody else could or that explanations exist.
Well, I don't live based on what other people's
No.
experiences are.
Okay, but you are doing that. You're
No,
basing
I'm living on
You're
what
basing
my
it on the
experience.
Bible.
My experience in exploring the Bible is I have found life.
But it's all through the lens of the Bible. You're looking at everything on what the Bible says. You're
Well,
looking
the
at it based on
Bible is God's
on a
word.
book that's a
How do
couple
you
hundred
know
years
that?
old.
How do you know that the Bible's God's word?
I know it because I know it because
See,
I know it.
You don't care whether or not it's true.
Yeah.
You want to believe because you want to believe what you want to believe.
I
It doesn't
didn't want
matter.
to believe the Bible. It was the last place I wanted to go. I
So,
went
all right.
everywhere.
I know.
and couldn't find
I
it.
didn't want to be moved by Jesus, but he moved me anyway.
You're
So,
kind of a pathetic man that you're such a naysayer to those who have faith.
yes, because
That's kind
faith
of
is...
pathetic, don't you think?
Hang on.
Why do you care if I have faith or not?
Because I actually care about other people.
And what are you
Faith,
trying to do?
Can
Take
I
my
answer?
faith
Can I,
away?
can I answer? Because I'm going to get to a question here in just a second, but I want to answer your question. Faith, if you're trying to determine what is true and what is not true, if you're trying to distinguish between fact and fantasy, faith is not the way to do it. You cannot do it by faith. Faith tells you nothing. Okay, you believe that the Bible is God's word.
Yes, I do.
Is it in error anywhere?
I don't think so.
You don't.
No.
Do you think that these are instructions from God that represent morality?
I do.
Okay, so if your child was unruly, would you take him to the edge of town and stone him to death?
Old Testament was a time.
No, ma'am.
You don't understand the scriptures.
Are you kidding me?
I'm kidding you.
All right, listen to this. If you're going to come on here and tell me I don't understand the scriptures, I'm going to explain to you.
If you're going to bring up Old Testament fundamental ideas that God was using to train up the early
No, ma'am.
experiences in
No,
the
ma'am.
faith, you don't know what you're talking about.
I beg to differ, and I'll demonstrate that right now. If you'll just be quiet for a second and listen. God in the Bible says that he's unchanging, he's eternal, he's the same now, today, yesterday, today, and tomorrow. So if something was morally correct in the Old Testament, for example, to stone your unruly children, then it should be morally correct forever. The same is true for slavery, punishing homosexuals, not eating shellfish, etc. When Jesus in the New Testament talks about it, he says that not a jot or tittle of the law will be changed until all has come to pass, despite the fact that he personally goes on to violate a number of Old Testament laws. Number three, please be quiet, let me finish, is the idea that I'm sure you believe that the Ten Commandments are binding. Do you not?
I do.
Well, okay, that's in the Old Testament. You should look it up. You cannot pick and choose from the Old Testament to say what you want to keep and what you want to throw
Okay, are
away.
you going to let me respond now to all this that you just spewed out at me?
Yes.
Number one, the Old Testament harshness reflects God's rage with sin.
So your God isn't benevolent.
He cannot
He is.
tolerate the wickedness of mankind. He cannot tolerate it.
So why does he
But
tolerate it
in
now?
his love,
Why does he tolerate it
why
now?
aren't you letting me talk like I let you talk?
Well, okay, go ahead.
In his love, he sent someone to offer a way out of this terrible trap that we're all in. Do you not think you're a sinner? Don't answer me because that'll get you started talking. Bottom line, you don't understand grace. You don't understand what's been done for you with God himself, sacrificing himself.
Yeah, I
to
do,
pay
actually.
the-
And I put you on hold, I didn't hang up. You're rationalizing. You are spinning this to say what you wanted to say. How beautiful and how wonderful it was that Jesus, through his life, death, resurrection, saved us all. What you're ignoring is that what it tells us is that your God is not always benevolent. In the past, he was angry and vengeful. That's not omnibenevolence. What it tells us is that he created this system knowing ahead of time what was going to happen, specifically created knowing that people would sin and fall away. And he thinks that it's just to punish one person for the sins of another, that the sins of the Father should carry on to the Son, that we are all responsible for original sin. Those are all immoral principles. Then what he does is he comes out and says, I've created this situation where I've turned everybody into sinners. So he sacrifices himself to act as a loophole for a rule that he made himself instead of just forgiving. It's an absolutely absurd and obscene and immoral philosophy. You can't just say, oh, that was Old Testament and now we're on to the New. And by the way, there are problems in the New Testament as well. I've done an entire dissertation on the Sermon on the Mount that goes word for word. You can say all day long that Jesus came out of love, but you're ignoring the ideas of original sin. You're ignoring the idea of an unchanging God. You're ignoring the moral code that Jesus himself supposedly said wouldn't change. And you're doing it all so that you can believe what you want to believe, so that you can focus on the positive bits, the turn the other cheek, and not the eye for an eye. You are picking and choosing, and you can make the Bible, by picking and choosing verses, say whatever it is that you want to say.
I believe the whole context of the Bible from the beginning to the end.
You just demonstrated that you don't.
Now, do you like to hear yourself talk?
I do.
Nobody can really demonstrate anything to you because you like to argue, as most atheists seem to really like to argue.
No.
And I really...
Hang on. I will get back to you and you can talk, I swear. There's one thing you've got to understand. All I'm asking is for you to demonstrate the truth of what you're saying. Not simply assert that it's true. Not claim that I don't understand because God hasn't given me a gift. Demonstrate the truth of what you're saying.
Faith yourself, right?
What?
See, you say what?
Because you were talking when I took you off hold.
Yeah, well, you've been having me on hold so that you could hear yourself talk
Yes,
and
so that we
try to
didn't...
convince yourself that there's no God, and, you're doing your thing up there, and really I don't understand why you open the lines up when you really don't want to hear what your callers are trying to say.
No, that's
to
not
you.
it. What I want is, I really wish we could come to an understanding about this. If you can demonstrate that what you say is true, I'm perfectly open
All right,
to that.
well, let me ask you a question. Do you think that you sin? Do you think that you commit evil, immoral acts?
Do I think that I've done things which are wrong? Sure.
Okay. And what are you going to do about that? I mean, do you have any...
I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm not going to expect some divine intervention to blanket forgive me from that. Because if I've done wrong to another person, the correct course of action is to apologize and make amends to that person and not blow it all off and hope that some God is going to just forgive me and make it all go away. That sort of mentality allows people to not treat people in a way that is good. If I believe I only have one shot at life and one chance, then I treat people better.
Is that what you believe?
Yes.
One shot?
Yes. When I'm dead, it's over.
Okay, so you're born, you die, you're born, you live life, you do crummy things, and then you die. And that's your life?
That's not it. You're born, you live life, you may or may not do crummy things.
You know anybody that has not done a crummy thing?
No.
Okay.
But what
Hello?
all right, your phrasing was you're born, you live, you do crummy things, you die.
That's your take on what your life is
No, that's
about.
your take on
Your
his
take
life.
on it. I'm saying that you're born, you live, you do some good things, you do some bad things, and you try to make sure that the good things that you do outweigh the bad things that you do.
What do you care
And-
if you only got one life and no God is involved? Just do whatever you want, right?
Because there are 6
So wait.
billion other people on this earth who I am accountable for.
You
to.
think that if you don't believe in a God, you should just go ahead and do whatever
Where
you
do
want?
you get a moral compass from if you don't have a God?
Why do you think a moral code has to come from a God? And what makes it moral? If God says tomorrow that murder is correct, does that make it correct?
God's not going to say that.
How do you know?
How do you know?
Because I know the living God.
Oh, and you've judged him to be good, right?
He's a good God.
And you think he's good.
I know he's good.
Okay, what basis are you using to judge that he's good?
50 years of, half my
No,
life
no, no,
not
no,
knowing
no.
him.
No, no,
and
no,
half
I'm not
my
talking
life
about
knowing
experience.
Him, I guarantee that God I know is a good God. And the last 25 years I've lived is a
What
testament to that.
basis are you using to say that he's good?
He is a supernatural God, and I experience him in supernatural ways on a daily basis.
Well, I guess you're going to have...
You logical guys.
Yes, we logical guys who aren't going to rely on faith and aren't going to waste any more time on this. When I ask you what basis you have for determining that your God is good, you completely miss the point and just talk about experience. You can't demonstrate anything you're talking about. You don't rely on reason. You're just going to believe things because you want to believe them. And we're out of time. Next week, we'll be on again from 3 to 4:30. You can call back. You can email tv@atheist-community.org. Or you can come down to Dog and Duck Pub. Actually, you can't come down to Dog and Duck Pub today. But other people can. So we'll see you next week from 3 to 4:30. Come join us at Dog and Duck. Thanks.